Hello everyone, welcome to Coffee with Evan. I don't have a coffee today, guys, because I had one earlier this morning. I'm sorry. I have this beautiful protein shake. It's got some berries, almond milk, protein powder, simple, easy. If you go to our Patreon, you can watch all Coffee with Evans. This one is free as we're dropping in some extra free content while we're all in quarantine. But if you go to Patreon/Your Queer Story, you can sign up for as low as $3 a month and you can get exclusive access to our Patreon content. But today is really laid back. Today I'm talking about books, which is one of my favorite subjects. I'm a very big bookworm. When I grew up in a fundamentalist cult, I'm talking about that a lot on the podcast and in my Coffees with Evan. And in the cult, one of the few things that I had was books. Now, my books were monitored. Like, I couldn't just read whatever I wanted. So most of the things that are on a person's school reading list, like high school reading lists, were forbidden. I was not allowed to read Catcher in the Rye or Of Mice and Men or Grapes of Wrath or basically any regular classic book. But I could read, and just being able to escape in a good book was wonderful for me. As young as like 5th grade, I would ride my bike to the library, I would load it up with books, and I'd bring it back home and I would read. And ever since then, reading has been my main tool for learning, for growing, for pulling myself out of depression. That's been kind of my lifeline. And so I'm going to talk about some of the books that have impacted my life a lot. Now, there's a lot of books that I love. I can't talk enough about all the books that I love because we'll be here all day. I'm going to talk about books that specifically impacted me and made a difference in my life. And I'm not going in any particular order of what made the most difference. I just have them stacked up here, so I'm going to grab them and go. This book, which I am rereading again, this is The Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown. If you haven't read Brene Brown, you really got to. This is a very thin book. It's easy to read. I call books like this poop books. That's not any kind of disrespect to this book. It's just that it's broken up in easy little segments. So if you had this on the back of your toilet, if you struggle reading and you took this down and you read 2 pages a day, you would learn a lot, and it's easy, it's digestible, it's not big and bulky, but there's so much information in here. This started me on a path of recognizing my full potential, of accepting my weaknesses, but also embracing my strengths and not getting caught up in that cycle where we just begin to believe that we're not good at anything. And it taught me a lot about courage and what it really means to be courageous. And that courage isn't just heroic acts. Courage is the day-to-day living and facing the world. So Brene Brown, I can't recommend her enough. This book is called One Breath at a Time. As many of you might know, I'm in recovery. I've been sober for 4.5 years. I was struggling a lot in my early recovery with a lot of the God jargon that you find in 12-step programs. There are a lot of good secular programs, and I'm not pitching any kind of recovery program. I think what works for you works for you. But being able to go to the meetings was helpful. People go on and on with things like, you can borrow my God for a night, or in time you'll come to believe. And they would say things that really annoyed me. Because again, I grew up in a fundamentalist cult, and so a lot of that religious jargon really weighs on me. And so One Breath at a Time, even though it does talk about a higher power and alludes to God, it was a much more practical approach to the 12 steps. So this is by Kevin Griffin. Again, it's one step at a time, one breath at a time, not one step, one breath at a time. Buddhism in the 12 Steps, Kevin Griffin. I'd really check it out if you are in early recovery and you need something. This book is controversial. This is The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. Now, there was a time in my life where I went through this whole phase of reading every book written by an atheist ever. Not every book, but a lot of them. I read Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens and Danny Dennett. The God Delusion was the first book that I ever read that truly challenged my perception of God. I had read books that challenged my perception of religion, but not my perception of God. And there's a reason that even as controversial as it is, it's a New York Times bestseller, because Dawkins, I think, lays the case out the best. He uses science. In this book, he doesn't come across as too angry. He has later in years come across as very angry, and I'm not defending or supporting any of these writers except for Brene Brown. I will support her to the end for right now, unless she turns into some white Karen. But Richard Dawkins, I'm not defending or supporting him. I'm just saying that The God Delusion, for me and my questions with faith, that was a pivotal moment in my life. This book, So this is Dracula and Frankenstein. This is for Frankenstein. I read Frankenstein right after I left the cult. And I think it was just like my being in my pit of despair that I loved it so much. I don't know, but I connected with the demon Frankenstein, who is not anything depicted like he is in the movies. And if you listen to our podcast, you've heard me mention this many times, but the demon in here is such a relatable character to me, to someone who had been rejected, who I felt I had been created by God and then rejected by God. And the demon feels he's been created by Dr. Frankenstein and then rejected because of what he is. There's a whole psychological reason behind it, but it's also a fantastic book. And it's amazing to me that it's the only book that Mary Shelley ever wrote. She just wrote it and then like put this beautiful piece of literature out into the world and ignited what is horror, and then just left. That was it. So it's incredible to me for his historical relevance, and it's incredible to me for its literary merits, and it's incredible to me for my personal connections. Another book, I'm Not Myself These Days, by Josh Kilmer Purcell. This is just a memoir by a gay man who's a drag queen. It's just a moment in his life. Basically, it looks like it's his spiral before he got sober. And it's just very well written. This was probably I think this was the first queer memoir I ever read, but it was definitely the first one that ever really stuck with me. My wife, it was one of her favorite books. She suggested it, and I read it, and I absolutely loved it. So it just really stuck with me, and it was really encouraging to me. Educated by Tara Westover. This is a fairly newer book. Again, I grew up in a fundamentalist cult. Tara Westover grew up in a fundamentalist sect of Mormonism. If anybody has struggles with their education because maybe you were homeschooled and it wasn't a good homeschooling, or maybe you grew up in a similar very conservative environment and you didn't have good education, or you were forbidden from getting education, and the way that she was not allowed to go to school, I think until she was 16. And even then, it was limited schooling. And then she just decides that she's going to go to Brigham and Young. And now she has a doctorate. So it's really incredible. I just love the way she presented her life, where it was enough where she was like, yeah, this was wrong. It shouldn't have happened. But she also has understanding. I don't know. I was just presented beautifully. I can't recommend that memoir enough. I'm almost done, guys. This book, up until about 3 weeks ago, I would have said my favorite fiction of all time was Frankenstein. And then I read The Well of Loneliness by Radcliffe Hall. I know, I'm such a cliche, but I'm going to tell you, I love that book. Now, there's criticisms. I get it. That this book is almost 100 years old, and if you really want to hear my thoughts on it, we're going to do a podcast episode. It's probably going to drop around the same time that this Coffee with Evan drops, so you can listen to it there. But this, from, again, the literary merits, I love classics. I love how beautifully they're written, to the way that I relate it to the characters, to just the bravery of Hall. Yes, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why there's well-deserved criticisms of this. I mean, for one thing, the main character, Stephen, who's a woman, just kind of hates the fact that she's an invert, which is was a term for homosexuality before homosexuality. She hates that, but she also embraces it because it's kind of like make the best of a bad situation. And so you can look at the way the self-hatred within the novel. You can look at the way that they erase bisexuals. You can look at the way that they downplay and belittle femme lesbians. There's so many legitimate criticisms, but also this book was written almost 100 years ago. And I loved it. I just loved it. You gotta read it. I don't care if you're queer or not, you gotta read it. And then the last one, Living My Life by Emma Goldman. There's 2 volumes. This is just the first volume. This was, again, early after I left, within the first year that I left. And I was seeing this girl, and for my birthday, she gave me the volume of Emma Goldman because I told her I like to read. I had no idea who the fuck Emma Goldman was. So I read it, and I felt so many emotions. I was elated. I was outraged. I was like, this woman is crazy. I mean, I had so many conservative views then, and I was so offended by her, but I also was so captivated by her. You got to read The Life of Emma Goldman. It's crazy. The woman is bananas. So those were the books that really impacted my life along the way in my 32 years nearly of being alive. And again, I love so many other books, so many, but I had these on hand, and I was thinking about them, and I know you may be stuck in quarantine, so maybe you want some book reading ideas. So those are my book reading ideas. And I'm going too long, so I'm going to let you guys go. But stay safe. Follow the mandates, please. Wear your mask. Think about others. And above all, stay queer.